Welcome to Voice Over Work, an audiobook sampler. Where do you listen? Today is Saturday, August 6th, 2022. The audiobook we're featuring this week is Peter Hollins' new audiobook, How to Self-Learn. Self-learning is not just about performing better in the classroom or the office. It's about being able to aim your life in whatever direction you choose and conquering the obstacles in front of you. In this book, Peter Hollins presents many science-based methods to help your brain absorb. Thanks for joining us today, and here's the preview of Peter Hollins' book, How to Self-Learn. Whether you're studying for an important exam or simply working toward your self-development goals, knowing how to learn will be an important determiner of your success. Perhaps one of the biggest problems with effective learning is not that people lack the memory, skills, or intelligence to learn. It's that they lack the knowledge of how to do it properly. Even experienced teachers and professionals can have outdated and unfounded assumptions about the best way to encourage the human brain to learn as much as it can. In this book, we'll be looking at ways to shift your attitude toward the learning process so that you can not only be more effective at reading, taking notes, remembering, and staying organized, but also be more capable of deeper conceptual understanding. We'll consider not only handy tips and tricks, but also take a closer look at the attitudes, mindsets, and overall principles that underpin genuine learning. First, though, we'll consider what stands in the way of effective learning, the popular misconceptions about what learning is and how it happens. The evidence-based scientific facts tell us that our conventional understanding about learning is sometimes wrong. For example, a study by Simmons and Chabris in 2011 found that people believed that the memory works like a video camera, whereas there is zero empirical evidence to support this idea. Here are some other common myths to drop before we continue to more evidence-based strategies and approaches in the remaining chapters. Myth 1. To learn better, study for a longer time. Wrong. The phrase, work smarter, not harder, comes to mind. Are you one of those people who looks up at the clock at the end of a grueling study session and considers it a success if a lot of time has passed? Do you write study 2 hours on your to-do list? This myth is a lot more pervasive than it first appears, but it may hint at a misunderstanding of how the brain actually works. It sounds obvious, but merely putting in the hours at your desk is not the same as truly grasping material, storing it, and remembering it for the long term. Myth 2. Students know best. In fact, you may be a poor judge of how well you're learning and not great at self-regulating your study. Without knowing it, you may avoid challenging material. Hartwig and Dunlosky in 2012 found that students often choose strategies with zero scientific backing. And Cornell and Bjork in 2007 claim that students' intuition about the best approach is not usually trustworthy. Maybe you're going through some vocabulary flip cards or practicing math problems. You may decide that you've practiced enough, but could that just be your laziness talking? Myth 3. If you've learned it, you'll remember it. When it comes to memory, many of us assume that once something is drilled into memory, it stays there. But cognitive researchers and learning scientists have discovered that the memory is a complicated, dynamic process. Your natural tendency is actually to forget, unless you're actively trying to avoid it. Some estimates have us forgetting around 80% of what we've learned within 1 or 2 weeks. Unless we deliberately do something to mitigate the effects of this forgetting curve, we will never properly retain information, and we can never be said to have properly learned anything. However, if we don't understand how memory actually works in the first place, we may be vainly studying away, unaware of the fact that we are committing barely any of it to memory. Myth 4. To learn something, drill it over and over again. Similarly, your ability to recall information in the short term is a poor predictor of how well you'll remember it in the long term. So you can't assume you've learned something just because you repeated it plenty of times during a study hour. You've probably had this experience before. You rehearse a piece of information over and over and really do feel like you've got it. Yet, when you take your exam the next day, your mind is blank. Why? We'll explore the answer in later chapters, as well as consider the value of interleaved practice, spacing, and repetition. And that's this week's episode of Voiceover Work and Audiobook Sampler. Where do you listen? Don't forget to join us on Tuesday for the chapter-by-chapter preview of this book, Peter Hollins' How to Self-Learn.